In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. When it comes to the different readings, and of course when it comes to the many different things that can be said about them, in some ways, we won't take it too far, but in some ways, the gospel is a lot easier than the epistles. Because the gospels, so much of that is a retelling of the life. A retelling of the life of Christ, all the things that he did and everything that was involved in that. And he gave teaching, plenty of it, but in some ways it's easier. Look to yourself instead of the other. And in some ways it's easier because we say, well, he was God, so he's able to do miracles. Great. So we just follow him. That's what we need to do. Fantastic. And that's simple. And often, the epistles, that could be a lot harder. And the reason is simply the focus. It's not true, by the way, that they're harder. It just can appear like that to us sometimes. And the difficulty with the epistles is that Paul is writing to groups of people, all Christ followers, all doing their best to follow the extraordinary teachings of a man who is like none other. And now they've got to live together. This person and that person needs to find a way not just to coexist in the same town, but in the same community. And being in community with those people, however we define them, however we should define them, or not, but being in community with the other, tough gig. Doesn't matter whether they're cultural lines or class lines or whatever the case may be. It's a tough gig to look to other people and to treat them as beloved. It's a tough thing. And Paul so often is writing to people who are trying to put this into practice. It's hard. There's a lot in his epistles where he talks theology. Today, it's about how do we live out our theology. Today, we focus on being of one mind with one another. It's a tricky one again because you can go either way. You can say, well, we must be carbon copies of one another, duplicates of one another, copy pastes of one another. And this is incorrect. So there's that error on one side. And yet there's also the reality that a community isn't much of a community if there's no unity in it. If we're entirely different people doing entirely different things, no one calls that community in any sense. And so it's a challenging one. How is it that we have this oneness of mind that Paul talks about in his letter to the Romans? It's a number of the adjectives that he includes that give us a lot of guidance. He uses patience 2 or 3 times just in this section alone. That it will take patience. That those who are able forbear with the other. There's a lot of those who are strong and those who are weak. And sometimes we conflate these terms so that we who are strong are doing the things that are actually assigned to those who are weak. And we're expecting those who are weak to do the things assigned to the strong. But in short, those who are able forbear with the other. Is someone not quite doing the thing that you would expect? Forbear. Have patience with this. How often I see that a little bit of patience, a little bit of forbearance, actually means that the problem solves itself. I'm sure that each of us could point to examples in our own lives. The response didn't need to be made. The correction didn't need to be given. Sometimes it needs to be given and we are not the person to do it, or we're not the person yet to do it, or now's not the right time. And we forbear. And we have patience. This willingness to be, perhaps it's inconvenienced for the sake of the other. Perhaps it's just willing to put aside our expectations of the done thing for the sake of the other. For the sake of the other who, for example, doesn't know that that's even an expectation. We are to forbear this. We are to have patience through this. By having patience and forbearance, then we have a shot of being there at the right time. It's real easy to lash out in correction. We can even justify it to ourselves later, but I was only trying to help. I was doing the right thing. That's as may be. Sometimes we can do totally the right thing in totally the wrong way. To be absolutely correct and all wrong about it. And that's part of having patience. Part of having patience, part of our forbearance, is that sometimes it needs to wait. Another time, another day, another person to tell. And this is needful. It's needful for each of us to have that patience, to ensure that the one giving the correction is the one that ought to do so. Hopefully, that one recognizes the time in which to do so. It's not the only component of oneness of mind. Patience is part of it. Bearing with one another is part of it. And we've presented this so far as a negative thing. I'm inconvenienced because of. This isn't going the way that I thought, but I'll live with it. Just a tangent, that can be its own trap. That can be its own trap of us thinking, aren't I good? Because I've forbeared the weakness of others, that must mean I'm better than them. Should have some great big warning lights if we ever have thoughts similar to those. No, it teaches us things. We are the ones who grow by doing this. By our patience, we may be saved. By our patience, our life and experiences can, not always, can be enriched. As a person that we thought that we were maybe tolerating, maybe just dealing with, maybe there's wisdom to what they're doing. There's reasons for what they're doing. And so we haven't just gained our brother in that case. We've gained extra perspectives in our life. And that can be from the simple. I think it's pretty safe to say that our food and restaurants have only been enriched by other people bringing in ideas, bringing in different mixtures, bringing in entire different ingredients. And this can only be enriching. It works like that for our lives as well. That we are able to offer the best that we can implies that, well, we can offer worse. We can fall short. And we should acknowledge that we often do. And that spread isn't just something that we have to bear, although it might feel like that initially, but something that is vivifying, something that is enlivening, something that brings us extra. This oneness of mind, this elusive oneness of mind, roughly, is that we're going in the same direction. We keep using these journey metaphors, and they tend to work for us. Most of us have been on hikes of some kind, and if not, we've at least walked from one place to another. And we're not all walking the same way. We don't all have the same kind of shoes on. Some found that hiking boots are absolutely necessary, while others have found that different things are needed. Some need orthotics. Yet each are walking together. And this is what we're aiming for in the analogy of oneness of mind. That we're traveling in the same direction, that we are edifying the other by our actions, by our words, that we are moving to the same destination. When we're told in today's epistle, do good for the edification of your neighbour, well, this is where we start to look inwards. The temptation, of course, is to look outwards for corrections. We look to the other because, after all, it's easier. The way that we are designed, our eyes face the front. I look at me when I pass a mirror. I look at everyone else much more. And the same goes for each of us. Where we focus, though, is on the edification of our neighbour and on how we fall short. How we fall short compared to what ought be. When we look to the edification of our neighbour, it's in our actions and it's in our words. They're probably the most detectable. Ultimately, it comes from within. It's going to spill out from who we are. It's not to say that that's static itself, but it will spill out from who we are. That means that our words should be, as it were, seasoned with salt. They should be good. They should be uplifting. Where possible, they should be constructive. There are exceptions, and they ought remain exceptional. Our norm should be for the betterment of the other. It comes out in our words, and it comes out in our actions. That we have an integrity of life. We're not one person here and one person there. We are judged as one person. We live as one person. Any bifurcation of our life is going to be inauthentic to ourselves. The common expression of that a person is a different person on Sunday than they are on Monday. But it could be anywhere else too. Are we presenting a persona to our friends and having a different persona for a different group of friends, our colleagues? Well, wherever it is, we ought to bring our best. We don't get to treat those people 100% and those people as subhuman. we're looking to be edifying of the other. Now that's a really high task. Saint Cosmas of Ertulos, he was a traveling preacher in Greece when it was under the Ottoman persecution. And one of the talks that he had at the villages was, all right, this is what you're called to. Memory serves, he quoted, sell all that you have, be perfect, follow me. Can't do that? What can you do? And he proceeds to go down. It's like a 12-step thing. When you see your neighbor, can you help him? No? Okay. Can you at least not hurt him? Can you do nothing to make things worse? And it progressively goes down the line. Because what can we offer must be our focus. Can we offer the edification of our neighbor? If we can't do that, can we at least be neutral and not tear down our neighbor? We know who our neighbor is, right? It's all the people we come into contact with. It's not they live 2 doors down. It's the people that we come into contact with. Be edifying, and if we can't do that, at least be neutral. This brings us to our oneness of mind. We bear with. We have patience. We do things for the edification of those around us. Whether here, and at least here, whether here or elsewhere. May we likewise be granted this oneness of mind, that we may follow him all the days in whichever community we find ourselves. Amen.